Welcome back to my channel. Leica just introduced a new standard zoom for the Leica SL camera system, and that's the new Vario-Elmarit-SL widest open f2.8. I'll come to the aperture in a moment. 24 to 70 mm focal length, and it's an aspherical lens. And Leica introduced this without a lot of drums and whistles. It's just there now, you can purchase it. So it's time on my channel to do a review, and now let's kick off the video. Let's put this new standard zoom, which Leica just brought to market, a little bit in perspective. And the first standard zoom which Leica brought to market with the first version of the Leica SL was the 24 to 90 mm lens. And this is a fantastic lens. I've reviewed this lens various times on my channel. I will link the videos down below in the info box so you can have a look into them. And if we remove here the lens hood and have a look inside, we see this is by nomenclature also a Vario-Elmarit-SL, and it has an aperture of f2.8 to f4.0, which means it's a so-called variable aperture. And that means as long as you're in the wide angle view here, you actually get a widest open aperture of f2.8. But the more you actually zoom in and the longer your focal length is, the more the aperture will be stopped down to f4.0 in the extreme setting. And that is what people call a variable aperture zoom lens. And that is not the case for this new standard zoom here, which just came to market. So this one here has widest open f2.8, which means no matter whether you shoot at 24, 35, 50, 70 or in between millimeters, you can always have your aperture in the widest open setting at an f2.8. And that clearly is a big advantage because it helps you to keep the aperture open even in the tele setting. Now, there is another standard zoom which you can use on the Leica SL, and that is from Sigma here. And this lens I've also reviewed on my channel. It's the 24 to 70 mm lens from Sigma, widest open f2.8, exactly the same widest open aperture as on that new family member here for the Leica SL lineup. And it's also a fantastic lens. And I will also here link the video down below in the info box so you can look this up, what I have to say to that lens. But it is a very good lens in terms of build quality and in terms of image quality. And it also has the feature that it has a constant aperture like the new Vario-Elmarit, where you can shoot at all focal lengths here at widest open f2.8. in contrast to the original Leica standard zoom with 24 to 90 mm. Last but not least, you have a fourth choice as a standard zoom lens on a Leica SL camera, and that's the 24 to 105 mm, which is a Lumix lens and is produced by Panasonic. And that is a very interesting lens. I have this not for a long time, and you will not find this yet on my channel, but I've shot this lens in a skater park in Zurich because I wanted to test this lens on my Leica SL2 for sports and action photography, because it gives you a slightly wider range here from 24 to 105. And I can say already right now the footage looks really good of these skaters who with high speed actually did their stunts in that skater park. And I'm going to post that video about that lens on the Leica SL2 in the next couple of weeks, so stay tuned and don't miss it. So this is another option you have, and here you have actually a constant aperture of f4.0. You'll see this if you have a look inside, f4.0, and that means no matter at what focal length you are shooting, even up to 105 millimeters, you can always have a widest aperture setting of f4.0. So you see, you have a bunch of choices if you want to go for a standard zoom on the Leica SL, SL2, or, and that's important to mention now, the Leica SL2-S, because that lens here has an improved autofocus speed, and that is important for cameras made in particular for videography and filmmakers like the SL2-S, where you have all these fantastic video capabilities which you don't get in the Leica SL2 and in the Leica SL. And I can say from my shooting experience, the autofocus of that lens is very likely one of the quickest I've ever seen on the Leica SL lens. It's spot on, it always hits, and it's really a pleasure to work with that lens and use the autofocus. Before I'm going to cover very quickly the specs of this lens, let me make another remark. And I actually can introduce that remark by zooming to the bottom of the lens. And if we do that here, you see it says Leica camera Wetzlar, but made in Japan. And that is something new. So this lens here is not like all the other Leica lenses made in Germany, in particular not in Wetzlar, in the headquarter of Leica, but it is manufactured in Japan. And there are rumors in the web speculating whether this lens maybe is produced by Sigma on behalf of Leica. I cannot confirm it, but I can also not reject that hypothesis. I just don't have verifiable data, but it is what it is. This lens is coming from Japan and not from Germany. Having said that, the build quality of the lens is absolutely fantastic, and I don't think there is anything to complain. And by the way, a statement saying made in Japan is a quality statement by itself. It's a full metal finish here. The zoom ring is very, very smooth but firm enough so that you not accidentally adjust it. You have a buttery smooth focus ring here. The image quality is fantastic. As I said, we are going to cover this in a moment. So it is made in Japan, but it is a fantastic lens. If you are one of those people who purchase Leica because you are fanatic or obsessed by made in Germany, then this lens is not for you. Go for one of the standard SL lenses and then you will have 100% made in Germany, if that is what you're looking for. Now, maybe the obsession about something being made in Germany stops when it comes to the price tag. And there's always a flip side of the coin. And here the flip side of the coin provides good news, because this standard zoom is substantially lower in terms of price than what you typically pay for a Leica SL lens, which typically ranges between $4,000 and $6,000. Here you pay for this lens here at B&H, currently as advertised, $2,800, so substantially less than you would pay for normal SL lenses. And maybe that's due to the fact that this is not manufactured in Germany, but manufactured in Japan. So let's make a quick visit to the spec sheet of that new Leica standard zoom. And if we go to the web and look this up at Leica camera, we find a lot of data points here which are interesting, but which are not what I'm looking for. I think here you see Leica is advertising this lens, as I mentioned before, for the classical SL and SL2, but also in particular for the Leica SL2-S, because it has this improved autofocus speed. And the image quality we are going to look into in a moment when I'm going to show you my own images. And here's the technical data. So first of all, field of view in the widest setting, quite wide, 82.3 degrees. Then of course in the extreme tailor setting of 70 millimeters, much narrower, 35.3 degrees. Then we have 19 lenses in 15 groups, and 6 of them are aspherical lenses, so that looks really, really good. What I wanted to show here, of course, is the focus range. And if you are in wide angle view, 24 millimeter is the extreme. You have 18 centimeters as your minimum focusing distance, which is quite close. In the tailor setting, you have to step back a little bit to 0.38 meters or 38 centimeters. And then, of course, focusing at infinity is for granted here. In the larger scale, which is the maximum reproduction ratio or magnification ratio, as you could call it, quite capable for close-ups and macro photography. In the wide angle setting, 24 millimeter, 1 to 2.9, and in 70 millimeter tailor setting, 1 to 4.5. And that is good enough for close-ups and macro. I will show a few images which confirm that, of course. And then you have more data here. Maybe the only interesting additional point to mention is the filter size, which is an 82. So if you want to purchase filters for that lens, it's not the cheapest one, because the diameter of the lens is actually quite large. Now, if we look at the field of view we can cover with 24 millimeters up to 70 millimeters. So let's have a look first at the sample image, which has been shot at a 24 millimeter focal length, and it looks like this one here. And then if we zoom in to 35 millimeters, we get a change field of view and of course get closer to that building at the horizon. If we then further zoom in to the next marking of 50 millimeters, because that's the normal focal length, the field of view looks like this. And if I further zoom in now to 70 millimeters, which is end of story and is clearly a tailor setting, then the field of view looks like this. So all in, we cover here a wide range of field of view situations, and clearly if you are at 70 millimeters, You can use this in fantastic ways for portraits, but also for close-ups. Also based on what we just saw before in the spec sheet of the lens, you can do macro and close-up type shootings. 50mm is what you would use for street, for instance, as a normal focal length. 35mm very likely for landscape and for architecture, and then 24 also for landscape and architecture. And you have a wide spectrum here, but not as wide as you had it on the first standard zoom lens 24-90, and not as wide as you have it on the 24-105. And as I said, this lens will hit my channel very soon. Look into it, because it is maybe a very good alternative to what you get here from Leica, and from Sigma. All the images you've just seen have been shot widest open at f2.8, but let's look into a few other images to actually make a few points here. And this is the first one I wanted to show you, because I wanted to show what happens if you vary the aperture on that lens. So this is shot widest open f2.8, 1/400 seconds, ISO 100, and at 70mm, so at the extreme tele setting here. And you see even widest open, this is super sharp and super crisp, and your background bokeh is very pleasant. And you see here these circular light spots from the bokeh, which is really, really nice. It's smooth, it looks good, it brings peace, it's kind of a calm background you get here. Then if we stop down to an f4.0, you see how the background lights change, and clearly the sharpness here gets more depth of field now in this image. If we stop further down to f5.6, you see how the background again is changing, and clearly here nothing changes, you just get more depth of field. And then stopping down to f8.0, you now recognize more structure here in the background with some person standing here in front of the fountain, and still you have an absolute circular shape of the background blurriness and the background lights here. So quite nice. And I think I like a lot how this lens is rendering the foreground and the background in the way you would like to have it. Another point I want to quickly make is when you get closer with the lens to your subject and what the sharpness is you can expect from that lens. And here is an example. If I zoom in here to 100%, you see actually how crisp this is, where the focus is sitting. And this was shot at an f4.0, but since I went very close with the lens towards the subject, the depth of field is quite shallow here. And you see where the focus is sitting, like here or here or here. These salt crystals on the nuts, they are very crisp and very sharp. The sharpness becomes even more accentuated if you actually shoot people. And here's an example which was shot again at an f4.0, but quite close to the model here. And if you look at the eyelashes here, super crisp and super sharp what you get. And if I go back to the library here and look at another example which I wanted to quickly show, it's this one here, I think. Then here you see again, if I zoom in here, the eyelashes are super, super sharp, but you have this nice circular shape of background lights coming from the aperture plates in a very pleasant way. And if you use the lens in its widest angle at 24mm, so here's an image f5.6, 1/400 seconds, 24mm focal length, then you can use this nicely for landscape, for cities, for anything you want. And again, the images are super crisp and super sharp if you look what level of detail you get here in this image. And if you use the lens at its widest setting at 24mm and you use portrait mode, so you rotate the camera by 90 degrees, then you actually benefit also in portrait mode from the 82.3 degrees field of view I showed before in the spec sheet. And here is a typical Zurich bridge, and the way leads you directly to one of the biggest churches in Zurich. So a very wide angle lens which you can shoot at 24mm. It's sharp, It's crisp, you get all the details, and you can use it in all kinds of applications. Last but not least, coming back to close-up shots, clearly you can take nice images of flowers here and you get this smooth effect in the image if you get closer. This image was shot at an aperture of f4.0, ISO 100, and in the telesetting at 70 millimeters, 1 divided by 1250 seconds. And if you take a shot of a flower, you might be surprised by detecting little bugs in the flower, like I did here later in post. I didn't see it with my naked eyes, but later in post there turned out to be little green bugs in that flower. I hope you liked that video. I tried to use not too much of your time to introduce that new family member for the Leica SL lens system. I can fully recommend that lens. I think it is super sharp. It provides fantastic image quality. It renders color towards the sensor in a very nice way. The build quality is fantastic. The zoom range you have from 24 to 70 is very likely all you need in all of your photography life. And in general, I think this lens fully delivers despite the fact that it is not made in Germany, but made in Japan, which clearly stands for high quality. If you liked that video, don't forget to drop me a thumbs up. Thanks for watching. Stay safe and healthy, and peace out.